The following Conscious Consumer Network recording of a live broadcast is available to purchase in high definition at ethymarket.com. Support free and independent media by becoming a CCN pledger. For €10 a month, you can have unlimited access to CCN high definition downloads at ethymarket.com. Ethymarket, the ethical marketplace for conscious consumers.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. Be inspired by the voices of visionaries, changemakers, and ordinary, extraordinary people who do what they do, all for the love of learning.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. I'm Lady Liberty, and this is episode number 21. In tonight's episode, we take a look at alternatives in higher education. Tonight, we explore the alternatives to higher education and ask the question, can students receive what was once thought of as a college education outside of the current format of an institution? Tonight, we ask the frank question, is college really necessary? Have we reached a point in human history where higher education no longer works? Does the traditional college setting function effectively today, or has current technology been a game changer? Can universities be progressive enough to keep up with the growing needs of employers, and do employers still overwhelmingly look to college institutions for their future employees? We ask the question, really, what is the point of a university education? Have we gotten so far away from the point of deepening our understanding of ourselves, our cultures, exploring how we fit into the world, that we just view college as a preparation for the job market? How do we frame the right questions in order to benefit our collective humanity? Tonight, I look forward to exploring these questions and more with this incredible panel. I'm going to give a brief introduction to each of our panelists, and then we'll start the conversation. Although these introductions are brief, we have more information about each of our panelists on the show notes page located at consciousconsumernetwork.tv, and look for the show notes page for episode number 21. There you will find more extensive information about their backgrounds and links to each of their projects and websites. So let's jump right in. First, I'd like to introduce you to the project Enlivened Learning. Meet Udi and Kelly. For a year, they made the road their home. Their job was to learn from inspiring people and places around the world, where they are co-creating places of higher education that nourish minds, hearts, body, and soul, and the human world around them. They are now telling their stories about what they discovered through photos, text on their blog, and through a co-creation of a series of short films, which are in the process of coming to life. They are carving new paths, having stepped out from the confines of academia, which they were both part of for many years. Both Kelly and Udi studied, then worked in the university system, so they have a really strong background. In September 2012, the duo left their academic jobs and headed out on a self-funded learning journey, visiting and documenting places of higher education in various parts of the world that are rethinking and redoing what the university can be. We'll get more into their project, and learn more about their individual backgrounds during the show, but I wanted to take this opportunity to welcome both Udi and Kelly to the show. So welcome. We're so thrilled you're here with us tonight.
Oh, great to be here, and thank you for inviting us. We're really happy to be here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next, I'd like to welcome Lisa to the show. Lisa has served as Special Educational Advisor to uncollege.org and their Gap Year program, an innovative higher education alternative. Lisa is the mother of grown unschooler Dale Stevens, the founder of uncollege.org, and the author of Hacking Your Education. Her son Dale speaks around the world on changing the landscape of post-secondary education. And in May 2011, he was selected out of hundreds of individuals around the world to be a part of the first, I'm not sure I'm saying this correctly, Thiel Fellows. The Thiel Fellowship is an alternative to higher education and recognizes the top change makers around the world under the age of 20. Lisa is passionate about catalyzing the change in education, community action, and helping people discover alternatives to take charge of their learning. So welcome, Lisa. We're so happy you're joining us tonight.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and I apologize in advance for my lack of technical skills.
No problem. We'll walk you through all of it. We're just so happy you're here with us. So finally, I'd like to introduce you to Bio. Bio is a young clinical psychologist, lecturer, speaker, and author from Covenant University in Nigeria. Bio is globally recognized for his poetic, unconventional, counterintuitive, and indigenous take on global crisis, civic action, and social change, and was recently enlisted as the recipient of the Global Excellence Award by Future Shapers. Bio is a storyteller, author, and passionate about knowledge, development, progress, and truth. And we are so honored to have you with us tonight, Bio. So let's start the conversation with you. And let's start this conversation with the question, is college really necessary? And before you answer that, I want to put to you the question, are we really framing this question in the correct light? Should we really be asking the question, what is the purpose of higher education?
Thank you, Lainey. I wanted to say thank you for inviting me to this conversation. It's a privilege to be here and to meet my friends again, Udi and Kelly, and to meet for the first time Lisa. Well, straight into the question, I would say that as a lecturer, though I'm on a sabbatical right now, but as a practitioner in the higher education complex, if you were situated in that context, you might hear, just like I think Kelly and Udi did, a slow sucking sound, the sound of relevance being, sucked away from the entire system. It's a feeling of emptiness, and I think I'll just leave it at that. There's a very strong sense in which the whole higher education enterprise, universities, are losing their reasons for being. And what is happening around the world is that people are asking different questions and exploring alternatives about, learning. And they're undercutting the deep and fundamental assumptions that created the university system. And, to ask the question, is college necessary? It might presuppose that, college is just one aspect, or is just the only way to frame education. And maybe what I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't really frame the question that way, that is higher education necessary or is college necessary? Maybe the invitation here is to ask the question, what are we learning for, and whose knowledge is it? And what are the fundamental assumptions that are framing the knowledge-making practices that make the university what it is, or college what it is? And what we're finding across the world, especially in the global south, is that people are awakening to the idea that college is not simply about learning. In fact, our experience in the global south is that it has probably nothing to do with our learning. It's all about access to the marketplace. It's all about access to the job market, to the industries. And the discourse of marketization, commoditization is gradually taking over the idea of education. And so that's unnerving a bit. If you had some kind of experience in the university system lecturing like Kelly and UD have, then you will know that there's something at heart wrong with the system, something troubling, and it's calling for these alternatives today.
Yeah, these are great points that you're making, and again, I was setting the stage for the show. I wanted to ask the question, is college necessary? But it occurred to me that we're not asking the right question anymore. If we define the purpose of college as being a place to receive higher education or a greater education or a specialty or to gain more knowledge, then yes. But just as you said, Bio, it's shifted from just a source of pure learning, in my opinion, to preparation for the job market. And so, those sorts of questions really need to be reframed. And that's why I'm so looking forward to getting deeper into that with this panel. Thank you so much. Bio, do you want to share a little bit before we move on about your background, a little more about the lectures that you do and some of the advocacy work that you are involved in?
Up until last year, I lectured in the university system. I was in Covenant University in Nigeria as a clinical psychologist, a practicing clinical psychologist, and a lecturer in the Department of Psychology. My doctorate was in the field of indigenous healing systems. I was invited by Local Futures to coordinate their International Alliance for Localization. So I took up that appointment and took a 2-year sabbatical. That was October last year. And so I still have ties with university system. I still do some lectures across the world. I did something around this exploring global education, or what a friend of mine, Manish Jain, would call MAC education. I did some talk around this in Harvard University last year as well. So basically, I'm still quite tethered to the whole complex, but I can't just shake off the feeling that something seismic is happening and shifting the conversation from those rigid fields and moving into much more lively settings.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you're here. Thank you so much, Bio. We're so excited that you're here with us tonight. Why don't we jump on over to Lisa next? And Lisa, perhaps you can address the same question from your perspective.
There's challenges with this small screen. Sorry for the slowness. I think what Bio said is really important, that we have to kind of ask those fundamental assumptions, whether those are still the same, because so much has changed since the university system was first put together. And I think if you look at, I think it's always been about more than knowledge acquisition, the kind of knowledge acquisition and access to opportunities, whether that's markets or, I mean, I think it's always been the alumni aspect has always been important in community and finding the connections that are going to give you access to the opportunities and employability. But there's so much that's shifted in how people can acquire knowledge and what the world is like today, and the cost factor. So making access really difficult for so many people. I think it's a great. I think it's really empowering that people have other options now, and that so many people are exploring them. I think the shift to I think that is college necessary. I still don't think we've made the shifts. Too many people are very fearful about that the traditional way, or the way it has been, is the only thing that's secure.
Yeah. So you're coming at this from the perspective of empowering a different type of learning. So the projects that you're working on with in collaboration with your son and your own personal writing, which I follow and I'm a huge fan of, as you know, is really about self-directed empowerment. And even though the project that you're working on with your son through the college is really stepping outside of the college system itself and empowering the learner to get what they need with their own direction. Could you talk a little bit about how you and your son came to this as an option?
So I think that so my son was when he was in 5th grade felt like he wasn't learning very much, and we live in a very small rural community where there weren't a lot of other options for just moving to a different school. And so we started to explore homeschooling and then the unschooling, where the students really directing their own education and working on their projects. And I had been a classroom teacher within the public schools at the K-12 level, and I always I felt like that I was always trying to empower my learners in the classroom, and they got the most out of projects that they put the most into, and that they were inspired to create. And so I think that came from my social change work back in the 80s. When I left college, I graduated. I was a first generation student at Duke University. I got a botany degree, realized I didn't have very much guidance at that time. They didn't have very many programs set up to support students who didn't have any of that social background to help them take advantage of the resources. And I learned so much on my own doing volunteer work and community organizing that I realized that kind of learning, experiential learning, that's motivated by something you care about, is really the most powerful kind of learning there is. And so I tried to do that with my students once Dale came out of the school system, and we realized that's how we could approach his learning all the time. And he went off to college, got frustrated with how many problems he saw, and wanted to come up with a program that could create for other people what he felt like he got from his unschooling education. And even if students choose to go to college, they're going to get more out of taking advantage of the university as a resource if they know why they're there and what they want to do, and they learn some of those other skills about how to access resources, how to connect with other people, and then how to share what they learn with others in the world. Oh, sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
I forgot. I talk with my hands. I need a cord that's twice as long.
That's okay. Well,
I don't know if that answered your question.
It did indeed. And we'll come back to you. We'll actually explore that a little deeper in just a little bit. So before we get too deep into that, I want to jump over to Kelly. Kelly and Udi are both on baby duty, so they're alternating between who's speaking and who's watching their beautiful son. So right now, Kelly, I would love if you could share. Actually, if you could first answer the question that I put to Bio originally. Number one, do we need college? And number two, is that even the right question to ask? So go ahead, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks so much. It's so nice to be here and meet all of you and to see Bio again. We haven't seen in quite a while. In response to your question, is college necessary? I guess I just, immediately now go to thinking, how is learning necessary? And that's really how I began to think about how this question should be asked, because college to me seems kind of irrelevant. It's more to me, and what we've learned through our own journey the past few years is really what is learning for and what is it all about. What Bio said earlier about the relevance being sucked away, I thought was a perfect analogy of my experience as an academic, but also increasingly I felt that as a student as well. And within the work we've been doing, getting to know, learning from, and documenting, we've been doing a lot of filming and now editing, but really trying to see how are other groups, communities, individuals organizing a learning space. And some are calling it a university space as a kind of form of rebellion. Some aren't, it's fine. But and instead of, this idea of sucking away relevance, to me, it seems like, I think of things getting more and more narrow and channeled and kind of rigid. And that to me is really, for a lot of people, what they experience within the university system. And one of the ways that Udi and I have been trying to think about some other questions is how you open that question up. So what can learning become? What's the kind of spark of possibility and potential? And I think as a learner, whether it's in the walls of any kind of classroom or any organized learning institution or space, that to me is really the fundamental question.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So you and Udi have traveled quite far and wide in order to really investigate these questions, and you looked at institutions, formal institutions, that ask these questions of themselves as well. Can you talk about some of the questions that sprung from asking these questions, like what does it look like? What does education look like? What is the purpose? Can you share some of those stories, in terms of your investigation?
Yeah, sure. It's first to say it's very difficult to provide any kind of narrow answer. And I think really one of the things because we visited so many places, and all of the places we visited really emerged from the context. So they're very diverse. I mean, if you think of kind of, biodiversity, it's a similar idea that there's a wealth of diversity out there in terms of how people are organizing, what they're focusing on, what they're prioritizing. And I mean, for Udi and I, it's been very much an unlearning experience as much as it's been a learning experience. We've been trying to unlearn a lot of what academia kind of, going through a PhD, what conventions you have to adhere to get that degree. And then when you're teaching within the institution, how can you push boundaries? And so, that for us trying to, we still are, I think we always will be going through our own unlearning, relearning experience while we're learning from others as well. And I think, really, and the big questions that came up again and again are, what are we here for as human beings? I mean, I think it goes very deep just beyond learning. And within all of the places we visited, that was really a core issue is, what is our purpose here, and how can we become more of a human being during our lifetime? And what does that really mean? So I think if you start with that question, and that each of these places are very much embedded in their own context, there's innumerable answers to that. I mean, later I'm happy to give some examples, but I'll stop there for now, if that's okay.
Bio, I think you're muted. Bio? Yeah.
I'm okay right now. Yeah. I was just going to add to what Kelly said, about the boundaries shifting. And, I think that's a really important thing to say, because in my mind, I think the very idea of a university is experiencing turbulence at the moment. And probably I could analyze it from two levels. There's a conservative shift happening, so that the walls of the university are expanding, so to speak. And that's why we're having practices like adult education, distance learning, and things like that. And universities are finding it profitable or advisable or relevant to decongest or to decolonize the idea that in order for people to learn, they have to come to a physical space or to the same physical environment in order to do the learning. So they're having different kinds of programs that expand the reach of the university, but a much more radical shift. And that's where the assumptions are changing. The much more disturbing shift is happening in where people are asking questions like, what's the use of a certificate at the end of the day? Why do I need to subscribe to the idea that only a certain set of people who have expert knowledge are the only kinds of person that can address my hopes as a human being? And then, the way we experience this let me speak about the way we experience this in Africa is, the dominance of the imperative of literacy. It's the idea that if you don't know how to read and write, then you're not really a fully formed human being. And that's so ingrained in our collective psyche that, all the government thinks about, all NGOs think about, and civil society organizations is, how do we help children across the world have access to laptops, have access to the alphabets, or things like that? And, that perpetuates the idea that, education or learning can only happen in this way. But what's happening, and that's why I'm so attracted to Kelly's work and Udi's work, is people across the world, in India as well, that especially in India, are asking disturbing, angry questions like, why do we need this in the first place? Who says I can't turn to my grandmother to have, to know about my world? Who says I can't access the so-called inanimate objects to learn about my universe? And so those divides upon which schooling was based are falling apart. The nature-culture divide, youth versus adult education, expert knowledge versus, ignorance, or, cognitive versus the material. And all these divides are falling apart. And I think that's the more exciting thing that's happening today.
I'm so excited to hear you saying these things, especially coming from the academic world. You're a part of it. I'm so excited to hear these concepts, these questions being asked, these points being raised, and that really gives us hope for redefining what higher education, or the purpose of higher education, is and could be. I want to ask you, Bio, because you specialize in indigenous culture and yes, how do taking outside the cultural idea that you have to learn to read and write, how do traditionally people address higher education in Africa? I mean, is higher learning something that's a cultural thing, a family thing, a part of work, part of living, or is it something separate that you have to go away and get this bit of information that you're being taught, or is it experiential?
I think we're losing our grip. We're let me say we're solidly in the grip of the development discourse right now. And so most families, I would say, in a country like Nigeria, for instance, would definitely you know would not critique the idea of education at all. I think it's commonplace to expect that you go to school, you get a good grade, you get good grades in school, you get a certificate, you get a job. That's the linearity that has not been contested yet. And what's happening, what I find in my own explorations is everything okay? Okay, what I find in my own exploration is that the experiential, intimate, carnal, if I could say that, fleshy, um, modes of learning, the very material discursive ways that we learn about the world is being silenced. And I got to experience that firsthand by chasing up indigenous shamans, um, you know, Yoruba shamans who specialize in healing and helping people connect with themselves and come off, quite psychologically devastating events. And, the question that I framed in the mental health industry in Nigeria, and this is just an example, is how do we up our game? How do we increase the number of hospitals? And how do we double the number of hospital beds to address the psychological and psychiatric needs of people in Nigeria? And, framing the question in that way is part of this larger apparatus, this larger system, that this is the only way we can consider, the problem of mental health. And I felt we can ask different questions, radically different questions that undercut those assumptions. And so I asked the question, are there alternative notions of mental health in the first place? And can we be invited to explore that? And I went after the indigenous shamans, and they have different sensibilities that have been excluded from the conversation. They talk with plants, Lainey. That might seem bizarre and queer to you, but they have different ways of relating with the world. Oh, thank goodness. They have different ways of relating with the world, relating with their context, and framing the conversation around mental health and sanity. So it's, just for an example, very quickly, one of them said, why would you want to do away with hearing voices? We see it as psychopathological for someone to hear voices, auditory hallucinations, we might call it. But those men were like saying, those voices are probably your allies, your spirit allies that are trying to reach you. And why do you want to pathologize it and use pills to harm those experiences? And so I think this really underlines the idea that the apparatus that frames those questions about higher education that we're asking kind of, perpetuates the dynamism of higher education. And we need to step away from that apparatus. We need to slow down and ask different questions altogether.
So do you think that higher education and the formal universities can actually live symbiotically with these older traditions as well?
There is a sense in which the formal settings tend to usurp the legitimacy and space. It's just like my wife she explores indigenous medical therapies, and she's a biotechnologist, a recovering biotechnologist, she would say, because she understands the insidiousness of big pharmaceutical companies, and she wants to step away from that. And so she would say that the way we conduct research is harmful to these indigenous realities, because we go there, we ask these localities, we go to people and we ask them questions and we plumb their ideas, and then we take it back to the university system, and then we patent these ideas, and then we commoditize it, and then we turn it into the language that is accessible to the academic world. And in some way, this is the kind of conversion, this evangelization of rationality is what is harming these indigenous realities. So in some sense, it's not symbiotic at all. It is very, very exploitative. It is very hegemonic. It's homogenizing. And if the university is to survive at all, I'm not one to say, let's burn down the universities or we don't need no education. You know, it's, yeah, it's the idea is that the very nature of education is changing, and I would say I will make bold to say that the very current iteration of higher education may not survive in time, because we ourselves are changing. Our needs as people, as a species, is changing, and that itself is pressuring the university to change, to evolve, to be something else. What it will be, I don't know.
Lisa, I know you had something to add, and go ahead and unmute yourself before you speak. Technology.
Lisa? Have I unmuted myself? I'm
Perfect.
so sorry. This is so frustrating for me. Obviously, I have not evolved enough. My ideas have evolved, but my ability to press the right button hasn't. I think so many of the things you said are just absolutely right. We're evolving, and just the whole idea that higher education is one thing, that it's one way, that it looks like one thing, and that everyone's higher education should be the same. I think something that's really changed and that's really powerful and positive is that people have realized they don't have to have someone else controlling their learning. It doesn't mean that you don't have someone who knows more than you, whether it's a professor or someone who's been in the field or a grandmother, but that you don't have to wait for someone else to give you permission to learn. And I think that's really valuable, and I think it's really scary to the people in the systems that have relied on them having a commodity that they can withhold from people.
Yeah, you bring up a really important point here, Lisa, and you're talking about the ability to learn. But, you know, it's interesting because both you and I are parents of unschoolers, and at some point, you know, the justification of unschooling, you know, is answered by saying, yes, but my child could get into university if he wants to. So I can justify our process and path by the end result. And I think it's about reframing, you know, what the cultural norm is, because somehow, you know, we're not talking about learning anymore. We're talking about fitting into an idea that's not our idea anymore. You want to comment on that?
and having that people want that signal, right? The certificate or the degree, or they're looking for something outside that's going to provide proof that it's good enough, rather than and that's what it's been used for in terms of people learning, but that the degree or the certification is used to open a door. And so you're right. The cultural shift, I think, is going to be slower, and so we do still have that justification. You know, people are interested in talking to me who are curious about unschooling or alternatives in learning because Dale's had some traditional success, right? Like the list of the things that you read, that he's written a book, that he's had the Teal Fellowship, that he's running a company. And I think helping people understand that they can be empowered to learn on their own, that it can look different, and to understand what those kind of underlying skills are to help them articulate what their value and contribution is part of what we have to help people do as the culture is shifting, and that you keep talking about it. I mean, in terms of kids coming to the Uncollege Gap Year program, some kids come and then they want to get a better sense of who they are and skills so that they can go back to college and really get the most out of it and be able to take advantage of it. Other people are looking for an alternative so that they can avoid the traditional system. But in either case, they still have that constant discussion with people and explaining why they're choosing an alternative. And I don't know. I mean, it seems like that's true in a lot of social change work. Part of what you're doing is trying to help people look at what's been taken for granted and been part of the culture for so long, and to be able to step aside and look at what are those purposes, what is it serving, how is it helping, how else can you show that you're credible or valuable.
Yeah, you're asking some really good questions. I was wondering, actually, Kelly, would you like to take on some of those answers? You know, what is the purpose of learning? What can you do that creates credibility in your own path? Would you like to share a little bit about some of the things that you've discovered?
Hi.
Oh, you're muted.
Sure. Am I still muted? Can you? I'm on. Okay. Sorry about that. We had a power outage here, so you lost me for a couple of minutes. So yes, and so I'm trying to think of the best way to respond. Just joining in the conversation. So in terms of the purpose of learning, I mean, I'll talk specifically about one particular place. We actually just finished. We launched our first film last night. It's available now. So and it's about a place called Red Crow College in southern Alberta. That's part of the Blackfoot community, and it's a really fascinating, complex story about the emergence of this place, because it's actually housed in a former residential school. And so a lot of the staff who teach there were forced as students they were forced out of their homes as children and forced to learn within the walls of this building. And so a lot of them have some really horrific memories and experiences from that. And what they've done in that space is not only have they reclaimed the space for their own, they've actually been repatriating, rejuvenating a Blackfoot knowledge paradigm, not just to kind of learn about what it means to be Blackfoot, but to actually learn through that type of pedagogy. And so they've prioritized, in one of their programs called Kainai Studies, they've prioritized rebuilding a relationship with the land. And it's actually very simple, in the sense of each of the students spends 3 times a week, a couple hours at a time, just sitting and slowly building relationships with the animals, plants, within all of the seasons around them over the course of a couple of years. And they don't rely on textbooks. They use textbooks periodically to identify species in both English and Blackfoot, but it's not textbook based. And the most powerful thing we saw and we heard and we learned with students and staff that we met was just the on issues of confidence. You know, not like, yes, they've built a lot of knowledge and understanding, but the confidence in who they are, what their purpose is, a different form of identity than they had before, just being more calm and relaxed and comfortable in their own skin. And I think, I mean, for us, and for them too, it's not just, they don't want only students who are Blackfoot to go through this program. I mean, they see anyone who lives there is part now of this land. And so it's not just a Blackfoot need, it's actually a human need. And I give that example because to me, it's very powerful with we see that as quite I think, that's an ecology thing, but even ecology things don't have this priority of building relationships. It's about, learning how species interact, but it's not really seeing you as part of that whole system. So I think just in an example like that, there's a huge amount that we can learn from, and that kind of knowing tends to be not really in existence in a typical university type of a program. So.
Yeah, and you hit on something that Bio talked about early on, which is learning, which is culturally relevant, and we take that aspect out of the whole university college theme. It a lot of times it tends to be homogenized information, and I think one of the questions should be, how do we determine what knowledge is worthy of higher education, of college? I think that's an important question. Would you like to talk about that?
I'd just like to say one more thing on that. I think it's cultural relevance, but I think it goes more than that. I mean, one of the kind of that's what the big encouragements that we learned from being at Red Crow was this idea of re-indigenizing yourself. So what would it mean for each of us, wherever we are, to indigenize ourselves? I mean, right now I'm living in Costa Rica. We've been here for 6 weeks, and so that's an entirely different task than if I'm in my hometown. And even in my hometown, I never indigenized myself because we didn't learn anything about anything to do with the landscape really around us, and how we could have learned about it. So I think cultural relevance, but to me it's kind of like a land-based place relevance as part of that. That I think. One thing I wanted to say before is I think another issue for us that's really important is universities are not just, we see universities as really implicated in the major issues we face in the world today, because in my perspective, they increase the division between all of us as human beings, but also in the places that we are, because these walls, these forts that we learn in have, very, 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 very little relationship with what goes on beyond them. So cultural relevance, yes, but I think we need to really see what we mean by that as well, and see it as a kind of a place-based idea of learning, ideally.
Lisa, Lainey, I was just gonna thank Kelly for deepening the conversation about cultural relevance, because most of the time when we speak about cultural relevance in the university system, it's tongue in cheek, so to speak. There's this pandering. It's like we're just paying lip service to different realities. It's like this museum speak, where there are beautiful cosmetic cultures out there, and let's see what we can do to understand them. But what is actually happening is the reverse of what Lisa pointed out, that most of the time when we think about knowledge, we think it has to come from an outside source for it to be legitimate. And that's why we seek certificates. We want it to be stamped that this is real, this is not rubbish, this is something you can take to the marketplace. And the beautiful thing about what is happening, which Kelly points out as well, is that people are getting comfortable in their own skins. It's about trust. We're learning to trust our own knowledges again. And you see, that's basically what schooling is about. Schooling is the message. It's the practice of denying the significance of practices in many ways. It's the practice of denying the significance of context, of place, of embodiment, of materialities. And if you were to go philosophical, you could actually trace the DNA of schooling and higher education from the Cartesian idea that the only thing that matters is something that comes from the outside, like the soul infusing the flesh, or truth invading this world of chaos. And this Archimedean vantage point is what schooling tries to access. And of course, that means that schooling is about a dematerialization of our worlds. And that's why we have franchises. We have schools that look the same, and the schools that will look the very same way they look in the United States will look the same way in Nigeria or in India. And it's basically about knowledge is the same everywhere. Knowledge is universal. But what's happening today, and what Kelly beautifully points out, is that we're learning to ask our own questions, learning to tell our own stories, learning to situate ourselves in our own languages, our own myths, our own realities, our own sensibilities. And that's beautiful. It's much more than cultural relevance. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not about framing a curriculum that meets the needs of the cultural man, so to speak, if there's such a person. It's about learning that the university system only has one type of conversation, one type of DNA, and that DNA is to trounce everything about the world and to reduce it to a concept that is alienating.
Wow, that's powerful. So in essence, if we disempower the owners of the information, the holders, the gatekeepers of the information, who are those that run the university, and it does become free access, then there no longer is a need for these universities if it is all about free access. So perhaps the cultural ideas haven't shifted yet because the gatekeepers don't want them to shift. So what can we do as those that desire to self-direct our own education? Where do we go? What do we look? Where do we look for this information? And maybe that's a question that Lisa, you might want to take. And you're muted. Lisa, you have to unmute yourself.
Am I on? Sorry, somehow I keep hitting it looks like I'm hitting unmute and it disconnects. I think that there's the positive part of the university can be that it's fun to learn in communities, and it's nice to be in community. It's when you're with other people who are working on learning and ideas and working with people, but that the university doesn't have to have a hold on that. And I think one of the changes in the empowerment and looking at the systems, I mean, I think that, let's see, in knowing now that there are so many more ways to access what the university used to have a hold on, and then also asking the questions about, what kind of shifts do we want in terms of power and knowledge sharing. And also, I think a lot more people are asking the questions that Kelly was talking about, that it sounds like they've done a wonderful job of at the Red Crow, is that it's important to be connected to the place you're living in. And I don't know, I've always thought that, maybe that's just because it works for me. And I have a garden and I like to be, and I have an ecosystems botany background, and so I've always been interested in the place, whatever place that I'm in. But it feels, I think we're all looking at that spark of possibility that you mentioned, more wholeness in our learning and moving forward. And I think in being able to come together in communities, whether it's we make communities of our own outside of the system. College is a community for people who are trying to do self-directed learning in a way. I think there's always been communities within universities. I mean, if you think about who you hung out with when I was more alternative way back then, and I looked for the people who were working on poverty and social justice issues within the community at Duke. Back then there weren't as many people as there hopefully are now, but there's co-working spaces, there's boot camps. People are looking at different ways that they can come together. The library is a great lifelong learning tool in many communities. I only know the US. I don't know what's available in other countries. But I think there's a lot, whether you find mentors or go for apprenticeships, or you can get it. I've learned so much. My probably most transformative learning was after my degree in botany and doing the social justice work and peace work, which was all volunteer work in Seattle. And people can participate so much more readily. And just look at us communicating together and having this conversation. There's so many more tools available for people to make those connections and to deepen their learning.
Yeah, technology is a huge part of it. We're actually going to take a break, but when we come back from break, I actually want to talk about the roles technology can play in furthering and self-directing higher education. So let's go ahead and take a break. And actually, the video that we're about to watch is Lisa's son giving a speech about why he founded Uncollege, and it's a great background, and it'll give us something to talk about when we come back. So we'll be back after this.
I just finished a book for Penguin called Hacking Your Education, which is all about how to educate yourself. My main qualification for writing this book is that I'm an elementary school dropout. When I was in 5th grade, I came to my parents and told them I didn't want to go to school. Like many 5th graders, I wasn't really enjoying my time in the classroom. And although my parents were fairly traditional, my mom was a public school teacher and my dad an engineer, both products of the system, they believed in me enough and had the confidence in me to say, hey, make your own decisions. If you want to leave school, go ahead. The worst thing could possibly happen is that you might go back and, hey, school's always going to be there. And while my parents spent many sleepless nights wondering about whether or not I would succeed outside of school, it worked out okay. And as Neera said, I became an unschooler, which is a self-directed form of homeschooling. I wasn't following any prescribed curriculum, my parents weren't teaching me. Instead, I created an education from the world around me. I found mentors, I built businesses, I did internships, I volunteered in my community, and I was able to do things that I never would have been able to do inside the classroom. Unschooling was determined by a guy named John Holt, who'd been an educator in New York City for 20-some years in the 1960s. And for years, he'd been asking the question that most people ask when they go about improving something, which is, how do you improve school? How do you make this better? And he'd come up with all the usual responses, and eventually figured out that he was asking the wrong question. That the right question to ask was, what are the outcomes that we actually want to see from school? Do we want school to deliver content? Do we want school to be a community? Is school about the teachers? Is school about finding mentors? Is school about getting a job? Is it about economic productivity? But it's important to note that this was in 1960. Another adventure into education reform was a book called Summer Hill, about a school in the UK started by a guy named A.S. Neal. This school is a democratic free school that's based in the UK. It started in the 1920s, and there's no curriculum. It's completely flat. And the book that he wrote by the same name, Summer Hill, sold 3 million copies between 1960 and 1973, which is an astronomical number. And it's amazing to think that even almost 50 years ago, that people were thinking about these schools, thinking about how to become self-directed. The real question is, though, not should we go to school or should we not go to school, but rather about whether or not we trust people's innate capacity to be curious. Do we trust people and think that if left to their own devices, they'll ask questions, they'll poke, they'll prod? Or do we think that they need to be tested and guided and molded and shaped like bags of flour? As an unschooler, I was able to do awesome things. I worked on political campaigns, I organized collaborative learning groups, I helped build a library in my hometown. I spent half a year living in France. I went to conferences that I crashed. I worked at startups in Silicon Valley. But even after 6 years outside of the school, I still went to college. That was because my parents had gone and my peers were going, and that's what society expects you to do if you want to be a competent, educated human being. And it's funny, I justified my choice to leave school by saying, oh, my friend Sarah was unschooled and she still got into Harvard, but so it must be okay. It's odd to be in a position where you're trying to define yourself by expectations outside of the system, but yet by the expectations and measures of the system, you exceeded. And what I found at Hendrix is that my frustrations that I had in my 5th grade classroom were still present 6 years later. Students were there not because they knew what they wanted to do with their lives, but because they didn't know what else to do with their lives. It seemed a very expensive way to spend time if you didn't know what you wanted to do. Since 1980, the cost of college in the United States has risen 350% more than the cost of housing, medical care, transportation, or housing, more than the consumer price index. And the trend is falling around the world. The UK just tripled tuition fees, and other countries are soon to follow. The average student now graduates with $27,000 in debt, which is just an astronomical amount. An amount that gets you saddled and stuck into a narrow path when you graduate college. There's now more student loan debt than credit card debt in the States. It's really scary, because we're facing a bubble that will be as bad, if not worse, than the housing bubble. At least with mortgages, there's something to repossess. There's a physical asset, there's a house. But you can't repossess someone's education. Sure, you can take back that piece of paper, but it's not worth anything to anyone else. But the challenge is not just that the cost is rising, but at the same time, the value of an education is decreasing. The New York Times called the most recent crop of college graduates, those under 25, Generation Limbo, because 22.5% are unemployed, and another 22% are working jobs that don't require their degree. Academically Adrift, a study done at NYU, found that 36% of students over 4 years of college showed no improvement in things like critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing as measured on the Collegiate Learning Assessment. My argument today is not that schools should go away or be banned completely, but rather that there shouldn't be one path. And right now, there is only one path through school. If you don't go to school, there are negative societal stigmas. It's hard to get a job. It's hard to get visas. It's hard to convince people that you are a worthy human being. This was most illustrated to me about a week before I left school, and I was having dinner with a friend in the cafeteria. And he said to me, "How are you going to support yourself when you leave school? What are you going to do? How are you going to learn?" So I moved back to San Francisco and started writing about my frustrations with college at uncollege.org, and realized that the same self-directed methodology with which I had learned as a child could be applied to higher education. There was no reason that I couldn't direct my own education as I'd done from 6th to 12th grade. In the year and a half since I started at Uncollege, it's grown from a small resource into a tremendous resource, and we now organize things like hackademic camps that get people together in the real world to help them learn skills, like finding mentors and creating personal learning plans to learn outside of school. And next year, we're launching a gap year program to take an entire cohort of people through the year-long process of not going to college. But these two things that we're doing are just one small bit of the fact that education is becoming decentralized. It used to be that you went to an institution and you got all of education there. You found teachers, you found mentors, you found content. And now that's all being pulled apart, piece by piece, brick by brick. And this is starting with the knowledge, one of the reasons that John Holt set out to go to school. But this is the easy part. MIT started putting their courses online 10 years ago. We've got the Khan Academy. There's all these open educational resources, and that's really easy. And it's great. It's totally awesome. But content, knowledge by itself is not education. Education comes when you get people together in a room, questioning, supporting each other's ideas, poking and prodding. And it's communities that I see being formed in hacker spaces, in co-working spaces, in incubators, and communities that are organized by things like Skillshare and on the internet with Open Study and Quora that are beginning to get to the point where people can really learn and come together and support each other outside of the classroom. The third and probably most important aspect of a college degree today is the signaling effect. The fact that a college degree serves as a proxy for individuals to show how competent you are. But today in Silicon Valley, if you want to get a job at a technology company, you don't send them your resume or your transcript. You create a portfolio on a site like Behance or Stack Overflow and GitHub. You contribute to that community. You show off your actual competencies, what you can do. And people judge that, not a piece of paper from an institution. In the future, it's not difficult to imagine a young woman who wants to become a developer who, instead of going to college, chooses to take courses online from MIT OpenCourseWare, form a community through an institution like TechShop, and gain a signal through contributing to the community on GitHub. What's really important to note is that these are not changes that will happen in 5 or 10 years. These are changes that are happening right now. And it's amazing to see that all of these institutions are changing right before our very eyes. Right now, curating your education costs a fraction of the price of going to school and is orders of magnitude more meaningful. Thank you.
Yes, so we really hope that you enjoyed that clip. And I want to jump over to Lisa to see if you had any thoughts or anything that you wanted to share, some insights about the beautiful talk that we just watched that your son gave.
That was a few years ago. I think the talk's a little bit old. It's been really as a mom, it's been interesting to see my son being able to go out and take his ideas out into the world and feel confident doing that. And then especially to care about wanting to help other people have better access to their education and have that same kind of empowering experience. And I think that since he started talking about uncollege, and when he first talked about it, people were starting to ask these questions all over the world. He immediately started to hear from people from around the world. And I think it's really encouraging and hopeful, that we're having this conversation here and that so many more people are asking the questions. And now there are many more programs, not only programs, but different ways that people can start kind of unbundling the university and those access to opportunities or knowledge or their personal transformation, plus figure out the skills they need to get employed and to really create those really powerful networks and connect with each other. So anyway, that was fun to I didn't realize at first that you were going to show that clip. It's always fun to see my baby. And one of those great technology tools that we have access to now that, that we can use in different ways. So I'll mute myself because I think you have someone else to go to. Thank you.
Lisa, thank you. And I know it's such a joyous moment to see our children doing great things in the world. I want to shift gears a little bit and address technology because we are talking about, is college necessary? And again, we've decided as a panel that we're reframing this question, but this is the general overall theme of this talk. And I really want to move over to Kelly. Kelly and Udi, her partner, have been doing incredible work. And not only do I want to hear what their perspective and findings are about the use of technology, but the way that it's looked at and utilized to get to goals that the people who they've met. I want to see how it's actually used. So why don't we just jump back over to you, Kelly? And I know Kelly and Udi, you guys have been doing such a great job juggling and taking care of your son. And I'm really grateful that you're able to split your attention and be here with us tonight and share some of your experiences. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, it's amazing what you can learn from your new children, isn't it? Especially in terms of technology, what's really important. I think kind of similar to the idea of cultural relevance, I think we really have to look at what we mean by technology. When we use the term technology, we often just think of computers or the internet or, and again, in the places we visited, the use of technology was core, but it really was about what's important to help us to become, to really engage with where we are, not to just use technology to gain expert knowledge. I mean, that is never the purpose. I'll give a couple of examples on that. At a place in Mexico called Tierra, the University of the Earth in Oaxaca, it is itself kind of a social movement. So it's both, connecting with indigenous communities around the state, but it also is very actively engaged, if not leading many different types of social movements. And a lot of what they do has to do with something they term collective autonomy. So not autonomy for yourself, but as a collective. And what do we need to know to do that? And so the learning, it shifts. It's about energy, it's about food, it's about having fun, actually. So it just really depends on what people are interested in, what they think they need. And so technology comes into all of that, but it isn't just to learn about technology. So it's just a tool to help with what they're trying to do. But at the same time, if you're someone really interested in technology, you would find what they do is incredibly technical, because they've really devised amazingly creative, artistic, scientific forms of practice in all sorts of things. And then if we jumped to a place we visited in Brazil, I can't remember what the acronym stands for. Udi would know because he's originally from Brazil. It's a place called ESPAC, and it's a community-based, it's a critical media school, and it's located in one of the biggest favela or slum areas in Rio. And what the students there learn about is really how to take over the media and create their own forms of media, because the media has been very oppressive to all aspects of their identity. And so it's a very technologically based thing, but again, it's for the purposes of what it is they're really trying to learn there. And so they do use, different forms of very technical equipment pieces, but it's again through a very kind of much more meaningful, place-based, artistic, creative, collective kind of form. So I think, long answer, but it really goes back to, what is the purpose of, and what does technology mean for where we actually are? And there's innumerable ways you can imagine that and create that.
Yeah, I hear you. Wonderful. I want to ask Bio if you have any thoughts about the use of technology and in and outside of universities as well.
I think I was going to say that one of the binaries that is disturbing, or that is constituting a disservice to these experiments, these lively explorations of new learning cultures, is the binary of old versus new. And the idea that, there's this saying that the master's tools, or the Lord, the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. And most conversations tend to move into the direction of saying that technology in any form is not indigenous, or that we should do away with any kind of technology, and it kind of inhabits, or it accommodates sentiments and messages that we're trying to do away with. And so technology is out of the question. But what I would say to that is we're reinventing, we're recalibrating the whole conversation around technology. We're hacking into it. And these are the kinds of experiments that Kelly speaks about. Technology is not, there's no old versus new. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. There's no strictly old and new. The old is porous and the new flows into it, so to speak, and the old flows into it. And so we're reinventing, we're reclaiming these technologies and using them to ends that serve, these collective experiments. And, I think that's what gets me excited, that we can do that.
Well, absolutely. When technology is used as a tool, tools, just like a shovel or a hammer, they get us from one place to another. I mean, it's something that we use. And so I don't think that the use of technology by itself is something that needs to be frowned upon. But yes, integrated into a whole concept, I think that's a
Sorry, Lenny. I think, let me sophisticate that claim just a little bit. It's much more nuanced than that, I think. It's, I don't think there's a linear relationship between the user and the tool. I think there's a sense in which the tool uses the user, so to speak. And in a sense, we're framed by the use of the tool. Our sensibilities, our ideas about the world are shaped in that way. For instance, we're having this conversation online right now, and there's a sense in which we're other sensibilities, which are quite real and palpable and present with indigenous shaman, with an indigenous shaman in Nigeria who thinks that he can actually telepathically communicate with you. Those possibilities are kind of excluded from this arena. And in that sense, technology is framing us, just like the technology of money frames us, and we're now homo economicus. We're beings that use money. So I think it's well situated, that concern about how tools can actually hamper or disturb the kinds of experiments we're doing. But there's another sense in which we're invited to move into move into those dimensions and get our hands dirty and look for differences and work with those differences to rework histories and see how we can recalibrate these technologies to serve our own ends or to serve deeper ends or new questions.
And in your opinion, Bio, how do we do that?
I think we're doing it right now. I mean, by having these kinds of conversations, by sharing these kinds of conversations. I just wrote a chat message to Kelly about the documentary. It's a documentary, right, Kelly? A video that they've just made, and I want to have access to that. And I want to have access to that because I want to be able to share it with my community and invite them to ask new questions about the world and to trust their own knowledges. And that way, I feel there is a dynamism, there is a synchronicity or some kind of turbulence that happens when we use technology. New possibilities emerge and diffract from those spaces. So yeah, we're doing it right now by doing this. But there's always the danger of expecting that technology would lead us to some kind of educational utopia, and we would solve all our problems. The justice will be done. I don't think we should expect that kind of, we should have such kind of expectations. These experiments are ongoing and reiterative and forever. We would never arrive at a place where technology would sit comfortably with everything we're doing.
I want to shift gears a little bit at this point, and I want to go back to the old paradigm of thinking. The old paradigm of thinking is universities are there to disseminate a body of knowledge, and once you have been tested that you have this particular body of knowledge, you get a certificate saying so. How, as those of us that are interested in changing that conversation, how do we change the conversation among the culture, among our own cultures, among the collective consciousness, to say that this is no longer something that we value? How do we start that conversation, and how do we create validity in our points? And I'll take that to Kelly.
Well, I think the conversation's already going. I think it's been there. I think it's just been out of the limelight. I think it hasn't been acknowledged, or it hasn't been part of the media. It hasn't. I mean, there's, once we started to want to learn. I mean, we knew about some of these places anyway, because I think both of us had an affinity towards them, being products of the system anyway. But things kept rolling. We found out more and more and more and more and more and more. So I think it's very much out there. But one of the things we're really trying to do in this project is we are making a series of films, and we just finished one. We've done 3 other drafts. We plan to do at least 7, possibly 13, if we continue down it. But the whole point is to get something out there and give, and say, hey, look, this stuff is going on, see it, be inspired by it, let yourself imagine with it. And also at the same time, we are really hoping to, I don't want to use the word help, but we want to support people coming together from these different places to learn about each other more, and to learn and just to get to know each other and build relationships. And as part of that, we are working with Manish Jain, who Bio's mentioned a couple times. He's a very good friend, and we're organizing a gathering at the end of August for people and places from all over the world to come together for 6 days and just get to know each other, to really kind of try and encourage this network to, to build, to strengthen, and not just to be kind of isolated islands, to build bridges within this arc of archipelago of amazing things that are already going on. And, you know, just putting this out there, we've had a hugely positive response, and more people. We want you know, everyone to come, but really the point is to say, it doesn't really need to start. It's there. How can it be supported? And how can other people who might have an inclination to step out of where they are? And I know so many. I mean, I'm sure the three of you and people listening also do within the system, students, staff who don't feel comfortable, who know that they want to do something else, but don't know what to do and how to do it, who to contact. And, you know, this is where the internet, this new form of technology that many of us do have access to, we can learn about other things that are going on. So I think that, to me, it's really this idea that we need to strengthen and highlight and learn from what's already there, and then have the support to maybe start our own thing with others in the places that we're in.
Did I manage to unmute myself? Yeah. Okay. I totally agree with you. I think that the conversation is happening, and I think you know, there's pockets of it. There has been some media, maybe not as much about some of the certainly on Dale's level because of the tech things and the Teal Fellowship, and they already have access to a lot of media. But I think the one thing that there are more communities, not just uncollege and unschoolers. There's more people who are searching, and communities trying to help people find things. And some people who are within the system, and I think gatherings like you're talking about are really important, because that, you know, this is great, but wouldn't it be great if we were sharing a glass of wine and we could hug each other at the end, and you know, then you can say, oh yes, and you've got to talk to my friend. So we can still do that. We can send each other emails about, oh, do you know Monica Hardy? And, you know, I can think of people who'd be really interested in what you're doing. And so I think that sharing, starting conversations, getting people together, bringing it up, and being willing to ask the questions, you know, even when someone comes back at you with well, no, I've got to have it, or this is the only way. I think a lot of times, a lot of that's coming from fear, or just not realizing that there are other options, and that's, you know, reframing how we think about things. I think maybe, like Bio said, that there's the risk of thinking that there's only one answer, that either it's going to be the computer that solves the answer, or it's only going to be the big coding boot camps. You know, everyone should go to a coding boot camp. Or I think getting away from that, is it human nature to want to have one right thing and everyone to agree with you? I don't know. But I think we have to working on getting away from that, and the way we can do that is to have the conversations, get together, and spread the word, whether it's a book or consulting, or you know, doing the work within your networks.
Thanks for that, Lisa. There's I think I want to speak from the African experience. There's the way that in response to that question, I think the way we have been, you know, reorganizing ourselves or challenging ourselves is to write stories, and where African indigenous cultures are known as, you know, storytelling cultures. And I just want to read a very, very short sentence or two from, you probably know him. His name is Chinua Achebe, and he's the writer of Things Fall Apart. Kelly's smiling, so that's a good sign that she does know him. He's required reading every word that I know of. This passage is very instructive. This is from Things Fall Apart. The white man is very clever. He came quietly and peaceably with his religion. We were amused at his foolishness and allowed him to stay. Now he has won our brothers, and our clan can no longer act like one. He has put a knife on the things that held us together, and we have fallen apart. And, you know, that's probably the premier, most prestigious novel in Africa. And what that represents and what is happening in Africa, though I would like to see living experiments like what Kelly describes, beautiful local explorations of learning cultures. But it seems that we're fully in the grip of this development discourse that we cannot see we've forgotten our own memories. We've fallen apart, so to speak. We've forgotten our own ways of framing, the intimate experiential ways of framing learning. And so what is happening in Africa is that we have decolonization agendas, Afrocentric agendas that try to ask the question, whose knowledge is it? I mean, why should we continue this paradigm of schooling? Whose knowledge is it? And wait a minute, what are we excluding by perpetuating these same structures of learning? Whose knowledge-making practices are we engaging in? And how can we invite new ways of making knowledge? What does that invite into the picture? If we start to see plants as allies, or the planet as a partner, or the nature-culture divide as illusory, what is happening here is that where storytellers are inspiring people to ask new questions. Chimamanda Adichie, Chinua Achebe before her, Wale Soyinka. And I think this is the most radical, the most radical step that we're taking on the African continent. Of course, there are pockets of experiments here and there. And I just want to tell Kelly, you probably know about Marion Knuth in Zimbabwe with the Kufunda village. And it's an amazing experiment in collective sharing and living together and learning together. But that seems kind of isolated, so to speak. Most of the alternative learning experiments in Africa are attempts to bring students who are outside school back into school, or to kind of make up. It's still the language of deficit here. We're still trying to make up for those students who have fallen out of school, who can't pay for school. And so, I would like to see this happen in Africa, on the African continent. And, probably what we bring to the picture here is new questions that invite us to think about our futures, our present, and the possibilities that we've excluded from the conversation.
I think that was so powerful, and I'm really grateful that you said those words. And I think just looking at the African experience, we can learn so much. This is really about the human experience at this point. So disempowering the institutions and putting the power back into the land and back into the love of learning. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. And that feeds, it has tentacles that reach far into the culture, into our own cultural identities, but our own individual and collective identities. And I don't think there's much more that we need to add to that. I do have to say, and I want to share with everybody on this panel, that the reason why we're having these conversations and the reason why we're on the Conscious Consumer Network sharing all of these ideas and thoughts is because there is a community of people out there that are so absolutely concerned with stepping outside of the status quo. And each person on this panel is doing such a brilliant job of doing so, and in the face of shifting those norms, those, the here's the degree, we're going to, you're certified now after doing college. Those are the things that we have to shift. And I think that I've learned so much from each person on this panel. So I'm grateful for every one of you for your contribution here tonight. I want to go ahead and wrap up this show and give the panel an absolute opportunity to share any closing remarks and share any final thoughts and their projects and websites and anything else that they'd like to share. And also remind our audience that all of the information and the complete bios of our guests and panelists will be on our website at Conscious Consumer Network, and just search for show notes page for show 21. So Lisa, why don't we start with you? Go ahead and share with us any final thoughts about anything that we've spoken about tonight, unmute yourself and go ahead and share your websites and products.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here tonight. I feel like I've learned so much, and I'm just, I can't wait to learn more about your projects, Kelly and Bio, and I think it seems like even though we're in different areas working on different kinds of projects and with different kinds of people, sort of the theme of meaning and creativity and trust and opening the mindset so that you're asking much broader questions is really important, and not looking just for the one right answer. So it's when I talk with parents, and I'm working on a book right now that I'm struggling to come up with a title with. But what I talk first about is trust. Is about trust and questions, and that's where you have to start. My website is www.lisanelbone.com, and you can find out about Uncollege at uncollege.org. And I think, I don't know, I'm really encouraged that we're at least starting these conversations. I think there's obviously so much more to be done, and so much to learn from what other people's experiences and context are. Thank you.
And thank you, Lisa, for being a part of the conversation tonight. I'm really grateful to finally speak with you, and I know we've been in touch quite a bit over the years. So thank you for being a part of this show. And why don't we jump back over to Bio? And Bio, please, any closing thoughts or any ideas or points that you'd like to make, and also do share with us your projects and anything else that you'd like to share as a final remark.
I'm coordinating the International Line for Localization at the moment, and a website is being built for that. There are other projects that I'm in touch with and part of that are evolving. I've just stepped out of the academia, and I'm new, so to speak, to these experiences. And though I've been doing a lot of talks and explorations around this for a long time. But I think what I'd like to share is a quote from Miles Harvey. It's a book called The Islands of Lost Maps. And I'll just read it out quickly. I'm sorry if this sounds lectury, but I love referring to literary sources that inspire me, poetic literary sources that inspire me. So it says, a map does not converse in sentences. Its language is our half-heard rumor, fractured, fitful, non-discursive, non-linear. It is many-tongued, a chorus reciting centuries of accumulated knowledge in echoed chants. A map provides no answers. It only suggests where to look. And I shared that because I'm inspired by Lisa's work and your son's work with Uncollege. I'm really touched by what Kelly and Udi are trying to do by breaking the boundaries of those thematic silos and bringing, a conversation together to form a network, of a lively network. And that is important because the paradigm is shifting, and the rug of human exceptionalism is being pulled from under our feet, and we have to relate to the world differently. In fact, these are the days where we have to rethink everything. And basically, I think I would end with the words of the shaman that I met and that I studied and I stayed with for some time. He was a frightening fellow, but his words were quite instructive and wise. He said, you would not find your way until you're willing to get lost. Only those that are willing to move into the dark can find new sources of light. And I think these days are the days we're entering the amniotic chambers of regeneration. And we're doing that with Lisa's work and Kelly's work and Manish's work and all those people around the world. So people should learn to see that the world is trustworthy, is not this strange, terrible place that the old paradigm has taught us to believe it is. It is a wonderful, abundant place to be in, and we can start to step into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bio. I am so absolutely inspired, and it's been such an incredible honor to speak with you and to have you on this panel. And I just feel so blessed. So thank you. Would love to jump over to Kelly next, and finally. And Kelly, I know Udi hasn't had a chance to pop in, but I would love to give you the opportunity. And if Udi has a chance to say hello or say goodbye, please do. And share with us any final thoughts, closing remarks, final words, anything that you'd like to express. And also, please do share your links and website.
Thanks so much. It's really hard to speak after both of you. I feel silenced. I just want to, process stuff. And it's a shame we aren't together in person, because tea, wine, whatever would be fantastic right now. But it's interesting. I think we all kind of are coming with a similar sentiment. Is just how we can each break out of conditions that are imposed by others, by ourselves, into reaching into what's most important and what we can really offer and what we're really here for. I was thinking before this session, what's one of the biggest things I've learned, and every place we went to, I went, and what Bio spoke about in Africa is very prominent, and very difficult and very heavy. But then I see it in my hometown. I saw it, with the Blackfoot I mentioned, in southern Alberta, dealing with all sorts of issues, in Mexico and Brazil, in the favela we visited. I mean, over and over and over again. But at the same time, there was a kind of healing focus as part of that, and each of these places taught us about different ways and approaches to healing, and that's possible, actually, because I think often, I know I come from, it's a kind of this thing way out there you can't quite get to, but actually it's just right there. I mean, we all have the resources, we just need to tap into them and connect with them. And I just wanted to share one quick story from when I was still working at the university. This it's a very short story, but this really told me that I really needed to get out, and I had a group of my students. I said for their assignment, which was very difficult for me to do because everything was so exam focused or essay focused. I said, okay, you guys, your assignment, you need to design and carry out a very small piece of research. And I had some things that they had to follow, and they said, well, what should it be about? And I said, well, what are you passionate about? They had no idea what to actually do. And I had students come and see me, and they said, well, what about this idea? I had this long queue of students, and I said, well, are you interested in this? And they said, well, yes, I am. I said, well, great. And there was such a source of profound confusion. And many of these students said that this was the first time that they had any chance to actually think for themselves. And I just, and actually encountering how lost a lot of these young people were just made me, I knew all this, I'd read about it, but actually engaging with that and seeing that and seeing how even that small opportunity to let them think and do something for themselves, it began a kind of path of transformation for lots of them and for me as well. And I think that, any change, any new path is just within reach, but we have to have the confidence to try and tap into that, really. So I want to close with that, and also just to say that as part of our project, we've been co-editing. We've been experimenting with not just this is our material, we're editing ourselves. So we've had a group of people helping us, and the places we visited, a lot of people have helped us. So if anyone's listening, it wants to get involved, please contact us. Our website is Enliven Learning, and we have a Facebook site. We've been a little slow of late because of our little boy, but we're still there. Just, it might take us a little while to respond. So thanks again so much for organizing this. And it's been so nice to have this opportunity to learn from you all and have a conversation.
Thank you, Kelly. And I am so thrilled that you've been here and a part of this conversation. And I'm so glad to finally get to meet you, even though it's just virtually. What an amazing conversation. It really wasn't just about university, it was about learning. And that to me, well, that's enlivened learning, isn't it? I just want to say, wherever you are and whatever you do, continue to always do it for the love of learning. And we have a special treat. We're going to show the trailer to Kelly and Udi's project. So stay tuned, watch that, and we'll see you all here next week.
What is a university and what is it for? There's never been one answer. What a university teaches, what it researches, and the values it represents has been in constant flux over thousands of years across different regions of the world. In each of these times and places, the university responds to diverse social and cultural needs. But diverse as these needs are, universities all share an underlying aspiration: to learn about the world and our place in it. Through this aspiration, the university is often understood as pursuing the highest education and knowledge a society holds. But who or what should shape the nature and orientation of our highest knowledge and learning today? What space is there for wisdom, for enlivened learning, a holistic learning that can emerge with our head, our heart, our hands, and our connection to the environment? These films are a journey to discover and explore these very questions. Both of us studied and worked in universities for many years as teachers and researchers. Because of the unsustainable path we feel universities are paving, we decided to step out of conventional academia, heading out on a journey to learn from alternative universities that are blossoming in different corners of the world. Universities are in a state of crisis. As institutions of higher education become increasingly profit-driven and bureaucratic, many students and some faculty are making their voices heard. Yet unseen in the media, there are many other innovative places of learning emerging outside of traditional universities and colleges. Through our series of films, we travel to and visit with indigenous communities, grassroots social and ecological movements in Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Chile, and India, to these localized places of higher education that are part of an emerging knowledge movement happening all over the world. Here we explore a silent revolution happening in higher education. This revolution is not just about how we access and fund universities. Rather, this movement questions the very nature and value of learning and knowledge. In each of these places, knowledge and learning are not being pursued for profit or training for the market. Instead, they are nurturing wisdom for people's potential to transform themselves, their communities, and the places they live in. What do you think learning can become?
If you really had to make a difference on a large scale with minimal resources, how would you go about it? Have you ever dared to dream of doing that which seems impossible? On a planet steeped with corruption and destruction, the question beckons, how do we change it? Media has a far-reaching impact on people and has been used to manipulate humanity into our current destructive patterns. In order to affect people into moving into constructive patterns of behavior, we need to construct a new paradigm of media. Conscious Consumer Network has been created with the explicit intention of giving the amazing truth-seeking, solutions-orientated, alternative media a place to fully realize their true potential with a cutting-edge, high-tech professional media platform. In turn, some of the greatest freedom-seeking hearts and souls of our time have realized the true potential of what has been created and have come together to provide their insight and inspiration on CCN. Conscious Consumer Network has become a unique, interactive information and educational network which provides a free-to-view, live-stream, ultra-high-definition channel to the world and features 25 live shows a week and growing with the addition of multiple language broadcasts. CCN has features comparable with mainstream media, such as being able to pause and rewind broadcasts whilst being live streamed. Catch up on missed or previous broadcasts, now available from CCN high-definition downloads. You can now purchase a high-definition download of your favorite CCN show from ethymarket.com. Support free and independent media by becoming a monthly pledger. This can be done with a monthly pledge of €10, which will allow you unlimited access to CCN's high-definition downloads, which hosts a back catalogue of over 250 shows which have been aired since the launch of CCN on the 1st of January 2015. In order to keep CCN free of corporate sponsorship and advertising, CCN has launched the Pledge 300 campaign. This is a realistic goal with the hopes of securing a minimum of 300 people who will each pledge €10 a month. With this number, we can continue to grow and operate and potentially expand into a second foreign language channel. Help keep alternative media in the hands of the people. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.